The Dark Mirror, a trap from another world. Sophie, an art student, traveled to a remote mountain town for her winter practicum, where she planned to sketch the haunting landscapes of the area. Her temporary lodging was in an old desolate dormitory, tucked away in the snowy mountains. The building was a relic, with long shadowed hallways, peeling walls, and an unsettling silence that hung heavy in the air. Locals warned her that the dorm was rarely occupied for a reason, and that students stayed there only temporarily. Sophie brushed this off as local superstition and settled into her assigned room. Among her belongings was a small antique hand mirror encased in an ornate metal frame, an heirloom from her grandmother. Her mother had always insisted on a peculiar rule. The mirror must never face an open window at nightfall. Though she found it strange, Sophie dutifully followed this rule, until now. Exhausted from a long day of sketching in the cold, she left the mirror on her bedside table, right in front of the open window, forgetting her mother's warning entirely. That first night, just as she closed her eyes, Sophie was disturbed by a soft but eerie tapping sound. Thinking it was a tree branch brushing against the window, she tried to ignore it, but soon she realized the sound was coming from the mirror itself. When she turned to look, she could have sworn she saw shadowy forms moving within the glass, phantom hands reaching out from behind her. Her heartbeat quickened, but she convinced herself it was only her tired imagination. The next day, Sophie ran into the dorm caretaker, an elderly woman named Mrs. Lin. Sophie mentioned her strange experience with the mirror and asked if anything unusual had ever happened there. Hearing about the mirror, Mrs. Lin's face grew pale. "Mirrors aren't welcome here," she whispered. "The last tenant in your room never came back. We looked for her for months. People said she ran off, but all she left was a mirror on the table. And now, I think, it has chosen you." Uneasy, Sophie decided to stash the mirror in her closet that evening. Yet as soon as she lay down to sleep, she heard the tapping again, accompanied by a low, chilling whisper. She opened the closet door and found fresh, jagged scratches on the mirror's surface, deep enough to resemble claw marks, twisting and writhing, as if someone inside was desperately trying to escape. She tried to wipe them off, but the scratches stayed, forming shapes that looked like tortured hands and faces frozen in silent despair. That night, Sophie awoke to a bone-chilling sensation. Her mirror was back on her nightstand. In the dim reflection, she saw her own face staring back, but twisted into a horrifyingly malicious smile. Her reflection wore an expression Sophie had never made herself. It was menacing, with a gaze that felt hungry. The reflection raised a hand, and she felt its icy breath on her cheek as it seemed to press against the glass, inching closer to breaking through. Panicked, Sophie grabbed the mirror and flung it to the ground, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. The next morning, she told Mrs. Lin everything that had happened. The caretaker listened in grave silence before she spoke. "Not every mirror shows the truth, my dear. It's found a way to take you. Leave while you still can." Sophie tried to break what was left of the mirror, hauling the fragments deep into the woods. But when she returned, the mirror was back, intact, on her bedside table. That night, the tapping stopped, but she began to notice strange things about her reflection. It didn't always mimic her movements, and sometimes she saw herself staring back, even when she wasn't near the mirror at all. Her friends noticed a change in her as well, a cold, unsettling smile and a distant, eerie look in her eyes. Within a few days, Sophie was gone without a trace. All that remained in her room was the mirror, where locals claim you can still see a young woman, forever reaching toward the surface, trying desperately to break free back into the world of the living. Thank you for watching this story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss any new creepy legends and mystical tales. There's a lot more to come, so stay tuned and be ready for more encounters with the unknown. Look out for the next story.